Hello again, Julia. This is Julia Woodman, and she's here for the third of her series of blogs on the Atlas study, a large-scale randomised control trial looking at the effect of Alexander lessons on chronic neck pain. And last time Julia took us through the main findings of the study, and today perhaps you could tell us a bit about some of the other findings, Julia.
So yes, I think today I'd like to talk about the other quantitative measures in the trial. So these are the things that you can measure, if you like. And so there's a range of different quantitative outcomes, and 11 of these were related to what you might call self-care. And the main one of these was self-efficacy. And this is a recognized measure, and it's defined as the person's confidence in their ability to manage their pain, without interference in their daily life, without resorting to pain medication. And if we look on this slide here, we can see that self-efficacy did actually increase in both the Alexander and acupuncture groups between the beginning of the study and 6 months. And then this carried on, this was maintained to 12 months. And this increase was significantly greater than the usual care group. And then we turned with this analysis to look at whether these increases in self-efficacy that we were seeing at 6 months were associated with any change in the clinical outcome. And the answer to this was yes. So in other words, it's likely that some of the observed improvement that was seen in the pain and disability was actually due to improved self-efficacy. So these results are suggesting that people who felt empowered to deal with their pain condition tended to do better. And for me, it's really illustrating the self-care nature of the Alexander technique, with people applying what they learned in their lessons to their daily lives. And then similarly, people who attended the acupuncture sessions were putting into practice the lifestyle advice that they received. So maybe changes to their diet or exercise or rest and relaxation. And I mentioned there were a total of 11 measures related to self-care. So apart from self-efficacy, which is one of these questionnaire-based scales where you select, what the answer that's most appropriate to your particular state at that time, there were 4 other measures which also had a scale, and then there were 6 basically simple yes/no questions which were related to self-care. And of these 11 outcomes, 9 of them were significantly better for the Alexander group compared with usual care at 6 months. And this difference was mostly maintained out to 12 months. So as one example, the Alexander group reported significantly greater ability to apply what had been learnt in their Alexander lessons in order to reduce pain in their daily lives. So significantly greater than was the case for the usual care group. And then if we turn to this next slide here, this is showing one of the other outcomes. And this is the response to the question of whether the participants learnt to improve the way they lived and cared for themselves. So at 6 months, which generally this was soon after the lessons had all been completed, 81% of the participants in the group that had attended Alexander lessons reported significant improvement in the way they lived and cared for themselves. And you can see that this compared with only 23% in the usual care group. And then really interestingly, is this benefit that you see in the Alexander group appeared to actually increase over time. So even though these people weren't having any more lessons, so it increased from 81% at 6 months to 87% at 12 months. And in comparison, there's no obvious continued improvement in the control group. So I think these
are interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they're really illustrating this kind of reinforcing and self-learning nature of the Alexander technique and the continuous benefit of applying it after the lessons had ended. Now, I think I'd like to look at the responses to, again, to this one, but also the 5 other yes/no questions, but to look at the results for the acupuncture group as well as the Alexander lessons sort of side by side. Now, you'll remember that Atlas was not designed for direct statistical comparison of Alexander lessons and acupuncture sessions, but if you have that caveat in mind, I think we can still learn something useful from looking at the differences in responses between, or the apparent differences in responses between these two interventions for these outcomes. So this slide here is showing the difference from usual care alone for each outcome, and it's showing it as what's called an odds ratio. So if you take the example we were looking at in the last slide of did you learn to improve the way you live and care for yourself, so then Alexander lessons were about 24 times more likely than usual care to lead to this benefit. And then acupuncture was about 5 times more likely than usual care to lead to this outcome. And with the exception of changes to diet for the Alexander group, all of the outcomes that you can see here did show a significant difference between the intervention, whether it's Alexander or acupuncture, and the usual care group. Now, looking at the apparent similarities and differences between the outcomes for Alexander and acupuncture provides some insight, I think, into their distinctive natures. So remember that the acupuncture included lifestyle advice. I think this is reflected in these positive changes you're seeing here to diet and exercise, etc. But there's a greater impact that we're seeing here for the Alexander group. And I think this is really highlighting the inherent self-care nature of the Alexander technique. And I think these results are actually telling us something else as well. They're demonstrating that the benefits that we're seeing, they weren't simply due to the additional amount of individual care and attention that people were getting from their Alexander teacher or from their acupuncturist compared with the smaller amount of time they would have got from their GP. Because, if that was the case, then you wouldn't, you'd see probably the same results for all of these. Whereas actually, what you're seeing is these observed benefits are actually the result of specific attributes that are unique to each intervention. So it's not just a so-called placebo effect. So for example, here you can see that there's no significant benefit for diet for the Alexander group. Well, you wouldn't really expect that because Alexander teachers don't give out dietary advice. So I think these are really, for me, these are kind of really interesting results.
Were there any other measures assessed?
Yes, there was a text message pain score, which was quite novel. So people actually, the ones who wanted to participate with us, they texted in their pain score on a scale once a fortnight, and these results were broadly in line with the NPQ's results. And there was also a quality of life measure which showed benefit for mental health quality of life for both Alexander and acupuncture, not so for physical quality of life. And I don't really, not really sure what those results are kind of telling us. And it's actually quite a blunt instrument, so perhaps maybe not a lot to conclude from that. And then there was a whole range of safety monitoring data that were recorded. Again, very important aspect of a clinical trial, and these were reassuring because there were no major safety concerns. There were no serious adverse events that were thought to be related to either Alexander lessons or acupuncture.
Okay, great. It's a big benefit as compared to sort of pharmaceutical solutions and some other kinds of solutions to problems like surgery and whatnot. Yeah. Okay. And so I believe there were also in-depth interviews conducted with a number of the participants, but perhaps we could hear about those from you next time or next vlog. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yes, let's do that.